but I don't think he holds sort of any sway actually he's not in the cabinet, and I don't think he has any sway across anything that's done by Labour. And I'm not even sure that Labour have got a policy on farming and the rural economy generally. And then, of course, they stupidly took the Treasury idea. I was talking to George Eustace a few weeks ago, and he said that the Treasury for some time had wanted to tax farms and had offered it to our chancellors sort of several times. We decided it was more trouble than it was worth, and it would also upset everybody. And that's exactly what it's done. And of course, if it raised huge amounts of money, it would have been worth doing in some ways, however painful. But this one does absolutely neither, and it just stops farmers investing in the future because they're worried about passing it on to the next generation. So that was that. Then they're sort of stopping all the payments basically, and people are sort of coming out of payments, and they don't know with their stewardship schemes, with the environmental schemes, they don't know what's going to be available. We're pretty sure if anything is available, it'll be a lot less money. And so people, especially with the time where certainly cattle and sheep are doing particularly well. The arable side is not so good at the moment, but it's, what do you do as a farmer? You need to know where your income's coming from, and you need to make decisions. And I think the trouble is, dear old Daniel, you wouldn't get that out of him. One, he wouldn't have the, be able to say, and two, dare I say it, he probably wouldn't know either.
Well, he certainly wasn't able to say, and he gave us the reasonably pat answers that you'd expect. Now, you used to chair the EFRA committee, which is the committee that holds Defra to account. So it's, the one Defra is scared of. And it does seem that Defra is, as well as being the department that is being dumped on by everybody else, so the Exchequer asks them to enact this farm inheritance tax, it's also making terrible mistakes in not telling people what it's about to do. So it cancels Sustainable Farm Incentive, SFI, hours before, with hours' notice and without telling anybody what's coming next. It cancels the release of pheasants near European designated special protection areas after the shoots have ordered all their pheasants. And then it's saying, well, you can have the pheasants if you like, but you can't release them. And then at the end of the year, we have countryside stewardship cliff edge. And they're not saying what they're doing about that. And if they don't say what they do about that quickly, 14,000 schemes that have been good for nature will be ploughed up on the 1st of January.
Yeah, I mean, Defra, in fairness to dear old Defra, has never been the sort of fastest on the draw, and you've always been able, when I was chairing the Select Committee for 6 years, you really had to hold them to account, you had to bring them in, what's happening to the payments, when are they going to be rolled out, when is the computer system going to work, all of these things. But of course, like everything in life, we just about got most of that right, and then you change it all. And then you see you had the SFI schemes, the environmental schemes, which George Eustace actually put a lot of work into. And I used to say to him, well, George, you said it was all not going to be complicated after Brexit, and it seems to be very complicated. And he said, well, I do try to simplify, and every time I come back, the civil servants have sort of made it worse and put it back to where it was. And I think that is key to it. And of course, now you've got a government that I think really sees land is used for building, for solar panels, for anything really, but agriculture. And of course, hunting and shooting, fishing, all of that, they're not really keen on, let's be blunt. And so, therefore, there is no priority whatsoever. And I think probably Defra at the moment are probably, if I can come slightly to their defence, I think politically they're being sort of hung out to dry, because I think the Secretaries of State must have known what was happening with the deer areas and didn't really tell Defra, and then Defra has to roll it out at the last minute, and Defra gets it in the neck. So, your Defra is only as good as the politicians that are running it. And I think a lot of you would have said the previous government had its moments, but I think this lot really just don't. I don't know what they want from the countryside. I think if we knew what they wanted from the countryside, I'd be happier, whether I agreed with it or not. I think the problem is that I don't think sometimes they particularly, it looks like they're at war with farmers, but I don't think they actually mean to be at war with farmers. I just think they just are inept. And land, like I said, you've got Ed Miliband, who's on a mission. Always be worried about politicians that are on a mission because, they are seriously dangerous. And he is, because he sees the environmental issues as, it is the new... it's a new religion, and that is dangerous because we need to be cleaner and greener, but we also need to have an economy and we need to have food. And of course, I've always been on about growing more food. I do a podcast, as you know, we can do both, which is have a good environment, but don't forget about food. And I think this government appears to have given up on food, hasn't it? I don't know. I mean, luckily the markets, the beef markets and the sheep markets across the world are quite tight, so prices are good, costs are high. But I think, if we saw a downturn in prices, then goodness knows where we're going to go, because I don't see the support. There are some grant schemes and things for that are there that you can apply for, but a lot of people spend quite a lot of money putting the grant schemes together and then get turned down. And so it is a sorry state. And I was expecting better. When I thought, they came in, I thought, well, new government, new hope. And normally Labour is not that bad to the countryside. They like to have a go at hunting. Hunting fought back.
They seem to their innate belief that they can get food from abroad. And I believe it's innate, because I remember Rodri Morgan saying this 20 years ago, that this is what we believe South America, in Labour, we believe South America is the world's breadbasket. He said that. And Miliband's plan to concrete over the countryside in order to reach net zero through new energy plans. Now, hidden within your answer there was more than usual criticism of the civil servants themselves, which I know politicians, I know you're not a politician now, but you don't do lightly. And I just want to draw your attention to the recent grouse shooting debate in Parliament, because what happened there, wonderfully forced by Chris Packham, brilliantly defended, and actually we ended up not only winning that, but promoting grouse shooting and the benefits, the environmental, economic, social benefits of grouse shooting. But what happened there was an attack on Defra civil service from the Tory shadow Defra spokespeople, saying it is the people who want to ban lead shot are not interested in birds and unborn babies. They want to ban guns. The people who are trying to ban you from releasing pheasants are not interested in avian flu, which is their reason for doing it. They want to ban shooting. And so there was an attack on the kind of political ideology of the civil service. So do you think that is a fair attack, or are our civil service wonderful human beings who would never dream of doing things like that?
I mean, I suppose you see, unless you have a sort of system like the Americans do, where you change the civil servants. If it's Republicans in power, they change them, and then if it's Democrats are in power, they change them again. When you're in Parliament, the civil servants that are on your side politically, because they are much better at carrying out your policy. And I think what we've got here is there is quite a lot of relatively, dare I say it, left-wing civil servants, and you know them immediately when you're there. Because I couldn't choose, like even the civil servants I had for the select committee, I couldn't choose them. They came there, and they were very, very good, and I got on with them pretty well. But you always knew, when I was trying to do an inquiry, for, making sure we could still spread, organic matter, manure on our ground, you need to choose the right soil scientists and all of these people to come and get the right message so you get the right report. And I had to work really hard to make sure they didn't stymie my process by bringing in somebody who was just going to try and sort of scupper the whole thing. And so I think ministers have that. And of course, what you've got now, don't forget, is you have the criticism I would have of the Labour ministers is that they're not really doing very much, but they are passively wanting to stop shooting. They don't want the pheasants. They don't want anything like that. Now, they're not going out, are they, and stating that in public. But you see, when the civil servants know that that's what the ministers really want, then you can't altogether blame the civil servants if they deliver that.
No.
And that's what's going on. And I think, you see, you don't realise that that like George Eustace and Michael Gove and others, they had their faults, but they had a lot of good parts, which was that they were fighting hard, you know, if it may be Roundup for spraying or whatever. You see, you can fight a sort of rear guard action and slow the whole process up, or you can sort of just wave it on through. And I think what's happening now, they're just waving it on through. The civil servants are picking up these issues. They were always there. And so now they've got that opportunity. It's always a difficult one because I sometimes wonder whether we did ought to do the American system and change the civil servants each time.
Do you think we're heading that way? Is that a possibility?
I mean, I think if we get back in, it'd be interesting to see, you know, if it's a Reform and Conservative, some sort of coalition at the next election. It will be interesting to see then as to whether the civil service, you know, some of the most extreme reform policies, I could see the civil servants having a little bit of a problem with those, and I think it will be interesting because I think, you know, my view of democracy, what was it Winston Churchill said, you know, democracy is the worst form of government barring all others, and he's probably right. But my view is, if, you know, whether you like it or not, you win an election and you do what you believe to be right. Now, the electorate can throw you out at the next election, and they invariably do. But, you know, that is key to it. So why should you really have, you know, a load of people in the civil service who say, well, we got to, you know, we've got to sort of draw back on this because, I mean, perhaps we do need a right-wing coup, you know. Perhaps we do actually need a real blowout.
Neil Parish calls for revolution. You heard
exactly.
it here first.
I mean, I've always wanted a revolution. Anyway, I'd largely like to lead it. I'd like to be a sort of benevolent dictator, really.
Didn't they fight?
I try to be reasonably benevolent. Yeah.
They fought the Monmouth Rebellion on your land, didn't they? Wasn't the Battle of Sedgemoor the last battle?
Well, yeah, not far away. And I think my family, some of them got deported because they were on the wrong side, as you remember. We in Somerset and Devon, the Cornish we've never forgiven because they wouldn't come and join us at the Battle of Sedgemoor, you see. So that's partly that there's always been a little bit of a problem with that. But we're getting over it now.
Yeah,
but it takes us over 300 years. In fact, I was on the local council when we had the tricentenary of the Battle of Sedgemoor, and we had to go out into Western Zoyland, and there was the monument. The cattle had sort of rather demolished it over the years, and so we had to sort of put it back together again. And my son at the time, our son Jonathan, he was 3 years old, and the Seal Knot Society had reenacted the Battle of Sedgemoor. They had the cannon and the horse and everything. And of course, Jonathan, after that, every Saturday wanted to go to a battle. He thought his time had arrived. So I think, you know, there is always that in the West Country anyway. But I think to go back to sort of be serious about this is, I think what I clearly want from this government is a plan of direction. If I was chairing the Select Committee now in Parliament, I would be saying to the Secretaries of State, I would be saying, I want you to spell out where you're taking agriculture, where are you taking the countryside, where are you taking country sports, what is your plan? Because like I said, you know, I don't think I'm being unfair when I say there is no plan, no visible plan. I think the visible plan is for the Treasury to take as much money out of the agricultural budget as possible under any pretext. But that may be being unfair to them. But I largely see that is what, and they see sort of about 3 billion there, and they've got their eyes on it. I think George Eustace was hoping that he'd put together enough policies with the sustainable farming incentive and all of those to sort of proof it against a Labour government. But I don't think it's going to work.
Well, supposing that plan is, as we learned this week, that 6,000 farm businesses have gone out in the last year. And I spotted a press release from the Labour Party from 18 months ago where Steve Reid, now Defra Secretary, was complaining that 6,000 farm businesses have gone under between 2017 and 2022. So well done, Labour. You're being 5 times as effective as the Tories in driving farm businesses to the wall. So supposing we find out that that is the plan, that they would like, and I'm going to come on to nationalisation of land in a minute.
Yeah.
But I mean, what would be your reaction to that? Is it, even if you discovered it was horrifically negative for the private landowner, would you still be satisfied that at least we have a plan?
No, I don't think so. I don't think I'd be really satisfied with that. I also think that they seem to want, either to be nationalised land or institutions to own land. And there's nothing wrong with institutions owning land, but I much prefer the private farmer, the private landowner, because they get on with what they have a plan for their business, they have a plan for growing crops, and they have a plan for diversification. You only have to look at the National Trust, who, most of the land that they were gifted, one, people were pro-hunting, 2, they actually wanted to see it farmed, 3, they won't let their tenants do the badger cull. Well, if you were a private landlord stopping your tenant culling, having badgers culled when they're losing lots of cattle with TB, that would be totally wrong. And a number of times the National Trust used to say, have you got anything else to raise with us? And I said, yes, the badger cull. You are not being reasonable. And so that's the problem, you see. And once all the land, and I'm being overly provocative, but basically, once a lot of the land becomes parts of institutions, much more easy for the government to then control it, much more easy to change policy, much more easy for dear old Ed Miliband, to have his new Jerusalem, and we'll all be green, except the Chinese will bugger that up, excuse my language, and that is the problem, and that is where they are. Now, I think we've got to fight back, and we are. And I think we will. I think the finances will get them, won't they? In the end, they're already nearly there. They borrowed 20 billion last month just to pay for a month's keeping the government going. Now you can't call $250 billion a year in extra debt just to cover your costs.
Well, there's one area. Actually, I reckon I landed 2 questions on him, which at least he acted with some surprise to, and absolutely everything else he deflected. I mean, like all politicians, he's very good. But one of them was that Defra, unlike any other government department which has been divesting itself of property, getting rid of property, Defra has been buying land. Yeah. And while the government hopes to make, according to Daniel, £500 million a year out of the family farm tax raid, they have been, I'm afraid, under the Tories, spending 350, and then the year before, £380 million, so a big chunk of that sum on buying family farms. And he looked rather surprised when I told him that. But you've got some experience of this in Somerset, haven't you?
Yeah, in Somerset, you see, they bought quite a lot of the Somerset levels. Our last Tory government had no business buying land. What you do is you manage land and you give payments. If you want conservation, if you want to raise the water levels in the moors, well, pay the farmers to raise the water levels. If you want to raise it really high, well, you pay them higher because there's nothing left. You see, they've for years now we've stopped farmers cutting until late, and all the wildflowers, all the biodiversity is gone from the moors. I have a cousin who farms, out end of the world, I call it. It's sort of after you get to North Newton and you sort of disappear into the moor.
That is the end of the world. You're right.
It is the end of the world as we knew it, and so, but that's key to it because the farmers knew how to handle this land. You see, and again, government buys it, institutions buy it, and then we get, great academics come out of, have never farmed in their lives and have been to university. They got great degrees behind them, and then they tell us how to manage it. Now they might be right, but invariably they're wrong because of the practicalities of it. And the more you leave the grass to grow, the more you leave the rushes to grow, and the more you destroy the biodiversity. And that biodiversity biodiversity was there because it was farmed. Now, not all brilliant farming, don't get me wrong, but I think we've gone now to a case where all farming must be bad and all conservation must be good. And that's where we must not go, you see. And it's the same, you know, with hunting and shooting and the pheasants and the grouse and all of these things. They're all part of our habitats. And they create their own habitats, and it's managed in a way for them. And I think, you know, we're in danger of, you know, just seeing an academic view of the countryside, and that really does worry me.
I can see lots of babies going down the plug hole with the bathwater. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I suppose there's one area I've never really managed to get through, and I was able to put it to Daniel yesterday, and he looked at me as if I'd gone a bit mad. And that was, we own 650,000 acres of forestry. We, the taxpayer, the government owns it. And we don't make ships out of it anymore, and we don't make pit props out of it anymore, and it doesn't underpin sterling. So why on earth do we do that? If we want to live in a world where private land ownership has a little bit of regulation lower down on top of it and some grant support, I mean, we could make 30 years of farm tax raid by selling off our forestry. Why do we own a forestry commission?
Well, that's right, because naturally we bought a lot of it after and leased a lot of it after the First World War, and of course planted a huge number of conifers. And so, I mean, now you see, you want to actually sell that woodland off, and then make sure we have a great sort of deal of biodiversity in forestry. I mean, I don't know if any of you have seen these Paulownia trees. I mean, they grow in 7 years, and then you cut them down, and you put them into timber or into building. You then should be able to sort of claim the carbon credits back, and that all comes from the City of London, that money, you see. So I can see quite a lot of scope here for various things, but what we mustn't have is these, you know, millions of acres of conifers. We've got to have a mixture of trees, and you see, and Defra are playing hardball, because I'm working with some Dutch guys on these Paulownia trees and Miscanthus and others, and Defra are finding all sorts of reasons and problems. Oh, the Paulownia trees might cross-pollinate, and you know, I mean, and yet they've got ones that actually won't pollinate. You know, don't create pollen and create their own seeds, so they're not actually going to cross-fertilize with anything. And so we're so slow at all this stuff. And you see, I mean, one of my pet hates are these carbon credits, because what are carbon credits? They're largely money in the City of London being moved around. You know, when we fly on a plane, somebody might, you know, decide to buy a farm in Wales because we're flying in that plane. They don't actually do anything to that farm. That farm is exactly the same as that farm has always been.
We had Carter Jonas on here yesterday telling us about the benefits of carbon credits. We should give them a shout, actually. Just get them round the corner and argue back at you.
Yeah, I will. I'll go and have a go at them in a minute.
But look, yes or no, should the government sell off our forestry?
Yes, I think it should, and I think it should have a plan how it sells it off, and I think it then needs to make sure that it's got a good idea of how that, you know, what it wants, how it wants to see that forestry run in the future in private hands, and it wants to give a clear support to get what it wants. And I think, you see, trees can be a crop. See, the reason I wouldn't plant trees, I mean, I got quite a lot of trees planted on the farm in strips and, you know, as corners, but would your children and grandchildren thank you for planting your farm to trees? Because once the grants have run out, then, you know, along will come Chris, whoever, Patton or whatever, and say, right, you can't cut that tree down. And so what do you do with them?
Well, apparently cutting down the wrong tree in Northumberland gets you 4 years these days. So you've got to be very careful. Yeah, cutting down a sycamore tree in Northumberland can land you 4 years in prison.
Oh, can it? Right, okay, yes, it does. Well, I've been locked up in prison because I did a banged up thing, but that was voluntarily, I hasten to add. But they locked me up for a week. So the Channel 4 said, what do you think, you know, people will think about that? And I said, well, a lot of people think I should have been locked up years ago, so that'll be fine. And funny enough on that one, I walked into the Mid-Devon show yesterday. There's a young guy, they must watch all this stuff on Netflix, and he said, you were in banged up, I want a photo photograph with you, so I was famous as a criminal, even if I wasn't as a politician.
Famous as both.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, one more area where again a very light punch landed on Daniel, and he could tell that I was leading him into a steel trap, and I was showing him the door, and I was showing him the bait, and he knew there was no escape. So over here we have unusually a head, well, two heads from one antelope. And on the 12th of September, the government is allowing the private members' bill to ban the import of trophies. So this is the effort to change laws in other people's countries, not entirely popular. And it does go back to the point we were talking about earlier, that it's a Foreign Office matter. Yeah. Why on earth have they landed on Defra to do? Lead shot, it's a health matter. Why have they landed on Defra to do? But in this case, I asked him, look, one of those is real, one of those is a replica, and which one do you want to ban? I mean, surely he can see the illogicality of trying to ban one of those but not the other. And the only way to ban the other is to make it a thought crime.
That's right, and I think, you see, we've never really worked out what's happening in parts of Africa where it's managed, the wildlife parks are managed properly. Then there is a lot of time for having the shooting, as long as it's actually, properly controlled and looked after.
It pays for the wildlife.
The money goes into that country, and that is where we're getting a lot of this wrong. And of course, we talk about colonialism, don't we? And we're all beating ourselves up over the slave trade, which was horrendous. But we didn't actually commit it ourselves, and so we got to move on. But I think my view on the developing countries in Africa in particular is we need to help them economically, and all of this doesn't, you see. And you see, it's like gold. One thing that works me up about the NGOs is golden rice, because golden rice would actually give them protein in that rice, and because it's a genetically modified blasted crop, they won't let them actually grow it. And I think they are starving people in parts of Africa. I'm sorry, I'm very strong on this, and it's all because you've got to have fresh seed each time. Well, those of you who are farmers in the room will know that you don't want to keep growing the same seed all the time, because you get more and more disease. And so the whole thing is madness. And, so it's quite interesting, the argument with the left wing, isn't it? Because the left wing are all very anti-colonial, very anti-everything we did. And yet they're still actually imposing their will on the developing world by being so anti-GM and all of these things, which actually could feed them a lot better and feed them with a better quality rice, because there's not much in rice otherwise.
You did do something very funny there. So we also had Robbie Moore, who's front bench Tory.
Yeah, I know Robbie
Defra.
well. Yeah.
And we had Greg Smith here.
Yeah.
So I asked them both about this as well.
Yeah.
And they both went, and then they changed the subject. And they didn't mention rice, but so there is an allergy to talking about the heads of wildlife in politics, isn't there?
It is.
It's going to be very difficult to change their minds on it, isn't it?
Very difficult, this one. And I think the trouble is we haven't looked at it widely enough. We haven't looked at the effects on those developing countries. Naturally, very bad governance in some of those countries. Some of them
hang on a sec. They have better. The countries they're talking about banning this from have better wildlife management. As the world's survey, the world ranking puts us right at the bottom, and places like Botswana and Namibia at the top. But we can't criticise them, and we shouldn't colonize them.
No, I think, but all I'm saying is, naturally, some of the areas where there's civil war and the like, it's very difficult to manage wildlife. But I think where it's managed properly, it's managed very well, and it is their country now. For God's sake, we had our moment, didn't we? And I'm not justifying it or not, but at least with our form of colonization and what we did, we actually built an infrastructure, built roads, and actually left some sort of civil service. When the Chinese go to Africa, they take all the minerals out, they put their own labour in, and they build a road that just about manages to last until they got the last lorry load of minerals out. And that's what the country is left with. That goes into some bent dictator's pocket, and that's it. You can see why they didn't put me in the Foreign Office, can't you? But that is what is happening in Africa now. And I think, I love Africa. I've been to Zimbabwe. I was banned by Mugabe because he didn't like my report on his election. The fact that 110% of people were voting in various polling booths. The fact he was walking people across the coffins and saying to the MDC voter, if you vote MDC, you land up in the coffin. And we've got these satellites and they can see what you're voting. And of course, a lot of those people were fairly uneducated, so they weren't sure whether he could see what they were doing or not. No, these are the people where a lot of the money's going, and that's more of the problem, really, than really banning anything coming in the way of trophy hunting. But how we sort out the politics of Africa, I really do not know.
Or is it even up to us? All right. We have another dodgy election coming up before August 2029, which is our own election, the UK election. A little bit of crystal ball gazing. I mean, I know a week is a long time. 3 years must be several lifetimes. What do you reckon could happen in 2029 if we held the election that summer?
Right. Well, after the general election, a year ago, I really was in a sort of state of depression. I thought, right, this actually could be the end of the Conservative Party. It still could be, but I don't think it is, because I think Mel Stride's done quite a good job in actually putting an economic policy there that's relatively sound. And so I think there is a place for the Conservatives. It's how we deal with and how strong reform will be. What we can't do is allow Labour to have a 165-seat majority, 33.5% of the vote they had, of the popular vote, and they've got a majority of 165. It doesn't do them any good because they can't pass anything because the backbenchers rebel, but I fancy I remember something about that. But seriously, it's that's the issue. So we've got to come to some sort of arrangement, and reform has got to come to some sort of arrangement with us, so that we don't split the centre right and the right wing vote to allow Labour in. Because at the moment, you see, in a way, Starmer does this sort of. Because I've said to you before, haven't I, Charlie, that my view is that he's sort of driven people. He likes to drive people from the Tories to reform. The problem he's got now, of course, is they're also coming from Labour to reform. That's not quite so good. And so his plan, none of his plans have gone wrong. But I think that's our issue, isn't it? Not the fight, because it was absolutely wicked how he got that majority. I mean, we needed a change of government. I'll accept that, and that's democracy, and we messed about, and we pontificated. It was all about the Tory party, and it was all about us, and it was not about the country. So I'm not trying to justify that, but I think the scale of the majority that he got, and then he's done absolutely nothing with it other than but excuse my French, bugger up the country, basically. Well, Rachel Reeves has done a good job on that as well. She'll be gone by Christmas, by the way. Put a bit of money on that. Because when she raises all these taxes in the autumn to balance the books, then dear old Starmer, though he's going to keep her forever. Every time a prime minister says he's going to keep a minister forever, you know very well that they're 6 months later they'll be gone, if not before. Remember when John Major, some of you are old enough to remember that, is every time he said, I have full confidence that minister, I used to say to my wife, well, he'll be gone by tomorrow. And invariably he was. And so I'm very suspicious with Starmer saying, he's got this wonderful relationship with her, and her chancellor is to be there for this year at the time. And he's very confident to say in future governments, isn't he? Because unless he pulls his socks up, he ain't going to be the future government.
He's not. They've got 90 rural seats, which they must have written off already. And I was talking earlier this morning about how those 90 rural seats those 90 rural Labour MPs will start to work out. They don't really have a party that cares for them anymore, and they can start to go a bit AWOL. And we saw this during the grouse shooting debate recently in Westminster Hall, where Sam Rushworth, a former animal rights activist, spoke up for grouse shooting because he represents Teesdale, where there's a lot of grouse shooting. And he said, I'm here to represent my constituents. He said, I won't go grouse shooting myself, but this is what they want, which was a fantastic moment. And if those 90 rural Labour MPs start to go a bit AWOL, a bit like the Blue Wall MPs did under Johnson, what will happen?
Well, I mean, you've seen it over the personal independent payments. When enough of them got together, they changed Labour Party policy and government policy, and so and Starmer was sort of dying in a ditch right to the last minute, and then he capitulated. So I mean that's the end of Starmer being able to really rule the Labour Party. The Labour Party is ruling Starmer now, and that is incredibly dangerous. And so yes, I mean it'd be interesting to see whether they can quite amass the numbers on the rural side, but they will certainly, you see, because the NFU have offered the government this idea where when you die, your family's not going to carry on farming, they're releasing the capital and they're getting the benefit of the capital. Then they pay tax on it. But if they're going to carry on another generations, they don't. And the NFU have done the figures. The government actually get more money from that. And yet, you see, they still carry on with this stupid policy. Because, you see, we'll all go to as many solicitors as we can find, as many accountants. They'll all charge us a fortune. How many accountants and solicitors in the room? I've probably upset them all by now. But, and we'll pay a lot of money. Then we'll drag out paying it if we have to, and then we'll try and, I mean, they're giving us time to pay anyway, aren't they? I mean, by the time they get it, we'll all be 110 if we're still alive. The NHS will have very little benefit from it because by then it'll have consumed everything and everybody, and that will be the issue. So I think why on earth they don't sort of wake up, be more reasonable towards farming, take the option that if you're going to carry on farming, no tax, and then have a policy on farming. It's not all lost for them, actually, but at the moment it is, because, and I know I've repeated myself several times, but it's because they have no policy on agriculture. There is not an agricultural policy in this country. Now, ours was quite bizarre, and dear old George, he was a little bit too green for my liking, and so I wanted more food and less greening, and I made that abundantly clear. But at least he had a policy. Gove had a policy. They all had a policy, but I'm not convinced this lot have. So, I don't think there's much fear of this room actually voting Labour. I got more problem with you voting Reform, I suspect. But joking apart, I think what we mustn't do, and I will repeat that again, is for God's sake, don't split the right-wing vote like we did last time, and let Labour in.
Let them in. All right. Look, just a quick straw poll. Do we have anybody thinking favourably towards Conservative Party next election? Hands up.
Not very many.
Anybody thinking favourably towards Reform next election? Hands up. 3 times as many. Not many, but still 3 times as many. There you go. Look, Neil Parish, former MP, farmer, neighbour, thank you so much for coming. Very kind of you.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Right, we have half an hour break, and I will see you at 1:30. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming in. There was a sort of very, very small audience.